But for the people in the Fat Logic subreddit and in comment sections across the internet, having those conversations just glorifies being unhealthy and is nothing more than a misunderstanding of the clearly established basics of biology and physics.
Hold on. Listen. Don't! If you make me have to defend women, especially white women, I will be banning you. Don't make me do this, okay? I think it's annoying when people do this like weird fat acceptance thing, or they're like, oh no, you can be healthy if you weigh 400 pounds or whatever. Like, I think that's cringe. I feel like if I was a woman though, I think if I was a woman who wasn't and knew that, like, yeah, obviously being fat is bad, I think I would be more annoyed though by all the men who claim to really care about fat acceptance because they're so worried about women's health. And it's like, no, you just want to look at people that are f***able.
Welcome to Why America. I'm Legia Miller. I don't know about you, but my For You page has been dominated by discussions about the rise in popularity of extreme thinness, perpetuated partially by the current press tour
Extreme Fitness
for the second installment of the Wicked franchise. Many people have noted the extreme change in body fat percentages of the cast members.
Jesus. Wait, what's going on here? Is this like a lighting picture thing, or is this... Okay.
Specifically Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, and Michelle Yeoh, all of whom appeared on red carpets.
Oh, I've seen this Auschwitz style. It's in fashion, apparently. Okay.
Recently looking especially gaunt. This has sparked a larger conversation about how extreme thinness is actually reinforced and perpetuated by fascism, and that it is no coincidence that thin is once again in now that we have a fascist regime controlling the government. But is that true? Is there really a massive government conspiracy to keep women thin and hungry so that we can't fight back when the revolution comes? Commentary about bodies online tends to trend towards black and white thinking, and I think that is also happening here. It also tends to ignite a firestorm of back and forth, of debate, in a way that few other subjects online tend to do. I made one offhanded single sentence comment in a video a couple weeks ago about how I don't like diet culture because I think there are better things to be doing than starving yourself, and y'all had more to say about that single line than about the entire rest of the video. And there's a lot to unpack there, which we'll get into. So I wanted to get to the bottom of this discussion and figure out correlation versus causation, cause and effect. Are we all getting more obsessed with thinness because of the fascist takeover in the White House?
I don't want to be rude, but these video essays are starting to feel so contrived in the theses is it theses or thesis? I don't know. They present. Maybe I'm leaning more conservative or whatever, but it takes like a crumb of the reality and turns it into a 1 hour long nothing burger circle jerk. I mean, well, maybe we don't even know what her thesis is yet, or we don't know how she's going to present it. I actually don't know what her position is yet, right? It seems like she asked a question. She presented that some people are saying that fascist regimes want women to be thin so they can't fight against the regime, but is that true? And then it seems like that's the video. We haven't seen the arguments yet, no?
First, let me take a step back to quickly define fascism, because it is a term that has been thrown around a lot lately, I think for good reason, but people tend to dismiss it as just an epithet that doesn't mean anything anymore because we use it as a label for everything. And the reality is that fascism is hard to define. It doesn't fit into a box like other isms tend to do, and it is entirely dependent on the state in which it arises. Robert Paxton's book, The Anatomy of Fascism, helps to give us a kind of definition. Under Paxton's interpretation, fascism is a mass anti-liberal, anti-communist movement, radical in its willingness to employ force, where nationhood and membership in a dominant class is put above all else, and where national unity and distinction from a class of deplorable others is reinforced by the state. And by anti-liberal, he didn't mean liberals like we use the term in modern United States, like liberals versus conservatives. He meant the term like liberalism to mean liberal economics, the idea of unrestricted free trade, a la neoliberalism, or what some might call globalism today. So an anti-liberal, anti-communist, pro-nationalist movement that revolves around membership to a prescribed group, and anyone outside that group is seen as a threat, as others in need of elimination in one way or another. The unique thing about fascism is that it matters where it develops, because 1930s Germany was far more susceptible to the argument in favor of putting the nation above the individual, whereas 2020's United States, fascism is wielded by appealing to the rugged individualism that is so ingrained in US culture. But the pieces are all there. There's the tariffs to reinforce protectionism and bring back manufacturing and fight against globalization. There's the radical willingness to use force exhibited on January 6th, 2021, and perpetuated in our streets every day now by a growing Gestapo made up of untrained, militarized, masked men who kidnap people off the streets as our government cheers. And those people being taken, the immigrants, the others, seen as such a threat to the nation, to the sense of nationhood that they claim is being eroded by our open borders, are being constantly vilified and stereotyped.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I'm predisposed to hate this woman for like 40 million different reasons, okay? But I like that she gave a relatively well fleshed out definition of fascism, and then she correctly pointed out that the way that it might manifest would be different depending upon the conditions of your nation, right? The conditions in Germany in the 30s were far different than the conditions in the United States today. And then when she lists out how, well, but today it might apply in the United States, and then she's giving at least one grounded example for every single point that she brings up. That's a good way to present an argument.
Typed in seemingly never-ending propaganda pumped out by the government. The pieces are all there. Robert Paxton himself, after January 6th, determined that Trump's regime can rightfully be called fascist, okay? So it's important to take a moment to acknowledge that it is not an overstatement to call Trump a fascist or his regime fascist. Leading scholars of fascism use the term to describe this regime. We are not being hyperbolic when we are saying that we are living under an increasingly fascist regime, okay? And it is true that historically, fascist regimes like Hitler's, like Mussolini's, placed a lot of emphasis on bodies, on the physical human form as a symbol of nationhood. Arno Breker was Hitler's favorite sculptor, and he helped create the mythology of the Aryan race in Nazi Germany. Perfectly proportioned, lean, muscular male figures and slender, athletic women. The agile, athletic body ideal was directly tied in Nazi propaganda with the strength and health of the nation, which was a really enticing image in a country that was struggling to regain its strength after World War I. The first president of the Weimar Republic in Germany between World War I and the rise of Hitler, Friedrich Ebert, was photographed in a bathing suit next to Defense Minister Gustav Noske, and the two were openly mocked for years afterwards because of how unfit they both looked.
Damn.
The public seeing this as a metaphor for the weak and flabby state of the government of Germany after the First World War. Of course, Hitler
Oof. Depending on where she goes, there's a lot of different things that she could draw from. You could arguably point to the idea that like the obsession with like trans women or what is a woman or whatever is some type of like body enforcement. Although that's more understandable. But then you can go into the Mar-a-Lago look, the obsession with how all the Trump women need to look on Fox News and everything in conservative media today. And then you can even take it a step further and go our civilian commander of the military, Hegseth, obsessing over fat generals and that we need to do PT for old guys behind desks or whatever. All kind of like plays into this a bit. Maybe. I don't know. Let's see what she does.
Himself wasn't exactly the model of perfect athletic Aryan beauty, but we've all seen Trump in his golfing whites. That doesn't really seem to matter. As Robert Paxton told the New York Times, quote, focusing on leaders, Paxton has long held, is a distraction when trying to understand fascism. What you ought to be studying is the milieu out of which they grew, Paxton said. For fascism to take root, there needs to be an opening in the political system, which is the loss of traction by the traditional parties. He said, there needs to be a real breakdown. Fascist movements succeed, Paxton wrote, in environments in which liberal democracy stood accused of producing divisions and decline.
But nobody cares about how this applies to Trump, no? Well, she just said it right. That this standard never applies to leaders ever. They always are, for some reason, they're exempt or they never fit the same standards that they talk about ever.
Succeed, Paxton wrote, in environments in which liberal democracy stood accused of producing divisions and decline. And that was true in post-World War I Germany, and it sure as hell is true today in the United States, where income inequality is at an all-time high and people are going bankrupt just trying to pay for housing, food, education, childcare, and medical bills, the basics to keep themselves alive. The MAGA movement has capitalized on this desperation and directed it into hatred for their chosen other, immigrants. And much like the current milieu in the United States is ripe for fascism, it's also ripe for the re-emergence of the heroin chic aesthetic. But the thesis that I would like to present to you today is that while I think it serves the fascist agenda, I think that this is merely a happy coincidence for the fascists and not the result of some vast fascist conspiracy. Because it turns out we've been policing bodies and weight for a long, long time, and that policing serves not to uphold fascism, but instead to uphold the various ideologies that happen to serve fascism, like eugenics, the patriarchy, and neoliberalism. And listen, I can already picture the comments section. Some of you may think it's really not all that deep. In fact, I went unwillingly into the bowels of Reddit to understand some of this health-based body policing ideology, and I found myself in a subreddit called Fat Logic, which as far as I can tell is a community of 35,000 weekly visitors who see themselves as healthy or aspiring to be healthy and promoting health and feel that they are diametrically opposed to what they call FAs or fat activists who are engaged in, quote, lengthy diatribes about how everything is society's fault. According to the page's about section, quote, falling victim to fat logic means accepting misinformation that will harm efforts to keep your body at a healthy weight or lose weight if you need to.
I think there are a lot of different sides to this. I think it's annoying when people do this like weird fat acceptance thing, or they're like, oh no, you can be healthy if you weigh 400 pounds or whatever. Like, I think that's cringe. I feel like if I was a woman though, I think if I was a woman who wasn't retarded and knew that like, yeah, obviously being fat is bad, I think I would be more annoyed though by all the men who claim to really care about fat acceptance because they're so worried about women's health. And it's like, no, you just want to look at people that are fuckable. You don't give a fuck about women's health. That absolutely is. It's like all the men who all of a sudden, super cared about women's sports, despite years of shitting on the WNBA. And you even saw actually even after where, was it at the White House where they threw like a fucking dildo on a basketball court or whatever? Did that happen at the White House? Or am I making this up? Really, because like women basketball players or whatever, like you guys don't give a fuck about women's sports. It's like, this is some weird anti-trans agenda. Like, don't pretend you give a fuck about women's sports. It's fucking cringe as fuck, Yeah, it's like, that's, oh no, it was a meme. Donald Trump Jr. posted a meme about throwing dildos. That was it. I think that's what I was thinking about, yeah.
Do so. There is so much to unpack about this, but I noted some common objections that these health warriors had to so-called fat activists equating thinness with fascism, because I have seen these same ideas swirling all over the place online, including in my own comment section. Those objections include that it's not that deep. Not everything has to be political. Though I feel like if you're watching my content, you probably already understand that nothing happens in a vacuum and everything is political if you just take a second to rub two brain cells together and think about it. That's not to say that everything is a conspiracy, but everything exists within society, and the way that we think and feel about ourselves and our bodies is absolutely influenced by the society we exist in. To pretend otherwise is willfully ignorant. Okay? And then a lot of the other arguments that they had against the idea that thinness serves fascism, I think stems from this idea, which again I've seen all over the internet, that there is a very strict binary here. Anyone who isn't preaching the gospel of maintaining a healthy weight is instead advocating for everyone to be so immobilized by their obesity that they can hardly get off the couch, which is also, I think, a willfully ignorant interpretation of the body positivity movement. Is there problematic behavior within the online body positivity movement as well? You bet your ass there is. But from my experience, consuming that content for literally a decade at this point, whether I wanted to or not, the general idea that is most often touted by people in the body positive community is that a person can be healthy while not fitting the stereotypical ideals of what a healthy body should look like. That the BMI scale doesn't actually dictate a person's lived experience in their own body, because some people can feel fine and have perfectly healthy test results and exist and function normally and still be considered obese on the BMI scale. That thin people who do fit the body ideal could be incredibly ill. That judging a person's worth based on the size of their body is problematic, and that there is discrimination that happens against fat people because our society has placed certain levels of worthiness onto people. That calories in versus calories out doesn't capture the whole picture of a person's weight and health. That things like poverty, childhood trauma, and mental health disorders and autoimmune disorders that are, especially in women, criminally understudied and misunderstood, play a huge huge role in someone's weight and someone's ability to lose weight or gain weight or maintain a healthy weight. At its best, the body positivity movement helps to complicate the conversations we have around weight and health because it's not black and white, and we actually know very little relatively about nutrition and how the body works, despite all the advances in modern medicine that do exist. But for the people in the fat logic subreddit and in comment sections across the internet, having those conversations just glorifies being unhealthy and is nothing more than a misunderstanding of the clearly established basics of biology and physics. Okay, but instead of fully engaging in those arguments, I do actually want to take a step back because this is a symptom of a larger issue that we should have a conversation about when we're talking about bodies.
Hold on. Listen. Don't! If you make me have to defend women, especially white women, I will be banning you. Don't make me do this, okay? There has to be a less annoying way to present this point. How has anything she said been annoying? This has just been the most driest, like, here's like this is a bunch of information, here's stuff. If you're like ultra annoyed at this point, you have to just like hate women. What? I don't understand what could possibly, she's literally just talking about a bunch of stuff. She's like barely even made, I don't even think she's made any jokes yet. How could you be so irritated and annoyed? What's wrong with you? Chill. Jesus Christ. Oh my God.
And how they are. I do actually want to take a step back because this is a symptom of a larger issue that we should have a conversation about when we're talking about bodies and how they are policed in order to serve the ends of the government. Because what all of these conversations revolve around, whether within the fat logic subreddit or the body positivity movement or elsewhere, is this ideal of being quote unquote healthy. Not only that there is one singular ideal of what healthy looks like, but that it is assumed that all self-respecting people should strive for that singular ideal of health. And whether or not someone strives for health determines their worth on some level. This pervasive obsession with health, or even trying to convince people that health can exist at every size, kind of turns us into the proverbial fish that is so surrounded by water they don't even realize they're swimming in it. In trying to convince people that fat people can still be healthy, we're taking for granted what health is and that it should be the ultimate end goal for everyone, and that someone's failure to at least attempt to be healthy is a deep moral failing. Once we step back and identify that assumption, now we can start having conversations around the politics of bodies. Instead of infighting in the comment section over whether or not Ariana Grande is healthy, let's discuss why we have placed so much moral emphasis on health to begin with, because that is its own social construct that has been orchestrated and promoted by individuals and governments for centuries. I'm of course not the first person to ever make this point. There's a great book called Fearing the Black Body, the racial origins of—
She's got the leftist voice lilt that makes it sound like we're retarded, and she's spitting gospel. As somebody who hates being condescended to, especially by a fucking woman, I don't know, I just don't hear that at all. What? Like, this is like in my mind, this is like a very dry presentation.
Fat Phobia by Dr. Sabrina Strings. So if I haven't convinced you that it is in fact that deep, please consider giving that book a read. It's really revelatory, because when we start examining how notions of health and what is the correct body to have shifted and changed throughout history, that's when we start to see how these notions perhaps are not orchestrated by fascism, but are certainly convenient for fascism to thrive. If we go back to the Renaissance, which was the 1300s through the 1600s, the aesthetic of the Rubenesque woman was the European beauty standard. These women were stately, to say the least, often somewhat muscular thanks to the influence of Greek art on the Renaissance, but also full-figured. Some might say, God forbid, fat. Fatness equated to wealth, but also fertility, especially where you have a societal system dominated by feudal lords and the peasants who serve them. Then came the transatlantic slave trade, the growth of the sugarcane trade that allowed for imports of larger and larger amounts of sugar into Europe, making it a lot more affordable and accessible to the everyday commoner. It was the increase in sugar consumption that helped precipitate a growing awareness of fatness and body mass, because, oh no, now the pores are getting fat. But
she's not saying slightly overweight people can be healthy. She's saying obese people are. Obese people are almost always have health issues. That's not really what she said. She just said that theoretically health can exist at different sizes, and just because you're one size doesn't necessarily mean you're not healthy, which is true, strictly speaking. It's going to be pretty hard to find somebody on the obese side of the scale that's healthy, or they're going to have a whole bunch of other health issues that are related simply just to their weight. I don't know how radical she is along that spectrum, but there are a bunch of like unhealthy, skinny fat people who just don't eat much and don't do anything, who like walk around with a whole bunch of moral condemnation for people with bodies differently than theirs, which is like kind of cringy, I think. But
sugar consumption that helped precipitate a growing awareness of fatness and body mass, because, oh no, now the pores are getting fat. But it was the othering of enslaved Africans that helped precipitate the fear and dread of having a higher body fat percentage. The European fascination with the wild, uncivilized black body is best exemplified in the story of the South African woman named Sarah Baartman, who was put on display as a kind of freak show in the early 1800s. People from all across Europe would come to gawk at her because she was allegedly double-cheeked up, and the Europeans saw it as a sort of living natural history museum. Not a human, but simply a freakish example of the exoticism of the African continent. She died at the age of 26 in 1815, and afterwards her remains, including her brain, genitalia, skeleton, and a body cast, were put on display in various museums. Her skeleton and body cast were displayed facing away from the viewer to emphasize continued interest in her exotic proportions, and remained on display until the mid-1970s. Her remains were eventually repatriated to her homeland in South Africa and officially buried in August 2002. Like, history is not that distant from us, you know? The point is that it was around this time, the late 1700s, early 1800s, and beyond, when the transatlantic slave trade was at its peak, when Europeans were being indoctrinated with the savagery of the Africans, that body policing away from full-figured women and towards a thin ideal began to first take shape. Victorians were real weird about labeling and categorizing everything, and a lot of pseudoscience sprung up to attempt to reinforce the differences between Europeans and Africans.
Can you be obese and healthy? Well, it really depends on what you mean when you say healthy. Like if you're obese, you are always going to have problems related to your obesity. There's always going to be some level of not healthy related to you being obese. But like it's not like healthy or unhealthy are binary states in the human body. Like, so I don't know, like, I don't even know how you would answer that question, right?
Try to create categories of people based on physical differences that in turn represented something inherent in the person with that physical difference. In time, the accumulation of body fat was equated with the out of control and barbaric black race, and it was the duty of the European woman to get as far away from that body type as possible. To be thin, to control one's intake, was a sign of refinement, of racial superiority, of godly self-control that no African could ever possess. Body policing coincided with the invention of races as a means of justifying continued enslavement of human beings. It's fine because they are different and worth less than us Europeans, and attempting to reinforce the supremacy of Europe and of the white race over others. This is, of course, also when eugenics was invented to give an official air to the racism through the creation of pseudoscience that sounded legitimate but was based on nothing. That's also when the early body mass index, or BMI scale, was invented. Remember how those Victorians loved categorizing and making shit up? Yeah, this was one of those instances. In fact, the BMI scale was heavily relied upon by Francis Galton, one of the primary developers of eugenics. It was originally created by a man named Adolf Quetelet, who was on a mission to determine the social ideal of the average man.
I still think people demonize this BMI thing way too much. Like, it's just a snapshot measurement. It's not like the be all and end all, but you can make estimates based on BMI, right?
His index was never meant to be used as a medical test, but instead was simply a measure of the ideal average normal distribution of weights of men in 1835, sure. And not even men generally. His data was taken from Scottish Highland soldiers and French soldiers, all male. It was, as is still the case for most medical studies, a metric designed for European men. The term BMI was coined by Ansel Keys in 1972 in a paper in which Keys also noted that the BMI was not fully satisfactory, but was, quote, as good as any other relative weight index as an indicator of relative obesity. Not of health, of relative obesity. He also noted that the BMI scale was a useful tool for population studies, but not appropriate to be used for individual evaluations. So for studying population trends and data, BMI numbers may prove useful, but for evaluating the health of an individual, it is not a particularly useful tool. But because it's so simple and has been repeatedly published since it was originally created, it's been adopted as a tool to judge individuals based on their weight as compared to the average Scottish or French soldier in 1835. Okay, but that's kind of an aside. The point is that the popular notion that thin is preferable has origins in the transatlantic slave trade, fear of being associated with blackness, and religious ideals of piety and self-control, also as a means of differentiating and distancing oneself from blackness and poverty. In a piece for Afropunk, Leslie Vargas writes, over time, thinness has transcended race, becoming a symbol of wealth and privilege across communities. For black women, thinness now operates as a form of social capital, a means to navigate a world that polices black bodies with even greater scrutiny. In spaces where thinness is equated with success, health, and desirability, black women are pressured to conform to these standards, further erasing the rich diversity of body types within black communities. And thinness definitely plays a role, but I would argue that it's actually health that has become the status symbol, the commodity of the rich. Women can be trailer trash and also skinny, for example, but it is health that is put on this pedestal because it is so unattainable for the average person who has high cortisol from the stress of working and trying to pay for rent and healthcare and everything else that's expensive but necessary for living. Someone who doesn't have time to go to the gym or meal prep or have the energy to eat 3 balanced, high protein, high fiber meals every day. The moneyed class with leisure is the only class capable of truly attaining health at the level that society has deemed is correct. This is not a product of fascism or being caused by the rise of fascism. This has been an issue since before Trump got elected. Heroin chic existed in the 90s under a Democratic president. Our boomer parents are almond moms with fucked up relationships with food and their bodies because beauty standards in the 50s and 60s were so specific that weighing 10 to 15 pounds more or less than you should would lead to ridicule and public shaming. That our fascist overlords can get away with more because we're all starving ourselves into oblivion is merely a happy coincidence of years of conditioning us to police each other over health. That RFK Jr. was able to capitalize on years of crunchy granola liberals falling down the Maha pipeline into anti-vax land, where health has been twisted and contorted to fit an anti-science worldview, one that is based partially on well-founded fears that our world is full of contaminants from major corporations that don't care about our health, and partially on conspiracy theories and pseudoscience. It's not a plan formulated by the Trump regime, but instead the Trump regime thriving where body and health policing has already taken hold. This racism, this patriarchy telling us to stay small and quiet, this was all already within us. Fascism just stepped in and said, how can I exploit this? So while I do love to blame the fascists for the ills currently being inflicted upon this country, this one can be blamed on something else, something that implanted itself in America long before today's fascist takeover. Say it with me, neoliberalism. Okay,
having more money does not make losing weight easier. Yeah, it does, but I feel like sometimes people, there's a balance, I guess. It depends on who you're talking to or what the debate is, but sometimes I feel like people are way too eager to take away all agency from people who aren't in ideal living circumstances, and it feels a little cringe sometimes.
With me here, mid-century America saw post-war prosperity and a blossoming middle class. That, combined with free market neoliberalism, to emphasize the individual, the entrepreneur, the bootstrapper, the American dream, the self-reliant individual who relies on their own dedication and hard work, letting the state off the hook for providing much of anything. That was put on steroids thanks to, say it with me, Ronald fucking Reagan, who brought rugged cowboy individuals individualism to the White House and sold America on the lie of trickle-down economics, deregulating industries from sea to shining sea, leading to the monopolistic, deregulated hellscape that has catapulted the wealth of the 1% into the stratosphere while leaving the rest of us with stagnant wages, a predatory health insurance industry, and a depleted housing market. Thanks to that deregulation and the rampant capitalism of the last century, we are now sicker than we've ever been, and we can't trust businesses or our government to do anything about it. But thanks to that rugged individualism, it's actually all our fault as individuals if we can't muscle through, literally, the impossible societal odds and just be healthy. Much like MAGA today and Reagan last century taught us to fear the welfare queens and the immigrants mooching off the system, anyone who is unhealthy because of anything that might be attributable to lifestyle choices is simply mooching off the system because of their own ignorance, stupidity, and laziness. And listen, let me acknowledge, there is definitely personal agency when it comes to your individual health. I'm not saying people are just the hopeless, hapless results of their environment and they should just lay down and accept the nihilism of their situation. Moving your body more and eating vegetables is a conscious choice that some people can make, but it is the oversimplification of being healthy. It is ableist as fuck to decide that everyone can just choose health, and the self-righteousness with which healthy people speak about unhealthy people, the moral judgment placed on people who are unhealthy, and assuming that body weight is the best test of someone's worthiness for empathy, that shit is toxic, and it mirrors the thinking and worldview of fascists. It helps to normalize seeing certain people as more worthy than others, as worth more than others, and that is the central tenet of fascism. That is what leads to people getting kidnapped off the streets into unmarked vans because they speak Spanish or maybe don't have their documents in order, which is not a criminal offense, by the way. But we are able to look the other way because we are more worthy. We were born here. We aren't criminals. We're more human than they are. And the capitalists and the billionaires and major corporate shareholders benefit no matter what, no matter who's in office, because this creates impossible standards that we are all chasing, that we are willing to spend hundreds and thousands of dollars to attempt to attain. And all they have to do is tap into that desire and promise us a cure. So that when Ozempic, the miracle weight loss drug, comes onto the market, promising to fix all our ailments, to give us the thinness we so deeply desire so that we can finally prove our worth, well, the perfect storm is already there, and the drug manufacturers are simply cashing in. And it is us, online, in the comment sections, in our communities, doing the policing work that benefits the fascists and the capitalists by commenting endlessly on whether or not people are living up to the healthy ideals that they are morally supposed to live up to, including Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo and Michelle Yeoh, who have gone too far, and I'm not sure they're healthy, and therefore they are worthy of criticism, which lets everyone in society watching the conversation unfold know, puts them on notice, that if they too step out of line of the ideals of health in either direction...
Wouldn't those people, though, represent like the top of your capital class? You're super wealthy. I think you need more than just like the class analysis or whatever here. I don't understand how these people are victims of the system rather than perpetuators or benefiters of it, unless you also bring in like a gender analysis or something. I don't know.
Mob of criticism will come for them too. All this does is help the capitalists accumulate more wealth. Oops, so sorry. Every video lately's turned into a Marxist criticism, but yeah, here we are. Your obsession with policing the health of everyone around you only reinforces the narrative that individuals are solely to blame if they fall outside the confines of what you think is healthy. And in fact, what you think is healthy has been dictated mostly by centuries of men just making shit up, usually influenced by the patriarchy or racism or both. And therefore, it is up to individuals to force themselves to conform to these body standards. And if they can't manage to do that, then they are bad and lazy, because the end goal isn't really health. Because if these people policing other people's bodies genuinely cared about their health, that would require a level of empathy that people seem incapable of extending to those who have been othered, those seen as morally reprehensible because they aren't healthy. And it abdicates the state's responsibility to provide for its people.
Hot take, this is kind of true. When you look at like online fucking women's workout shit, and like 95% of it is like how to grow a bigger butt. Like, this is not working out for the sake of getting healthier or for becoming more flexible or for getting more bone density or for increasing your overall lean muscle mass. It's literally just the most autistic, retarded shit in the fucking universe. And it's like, why?
The basics necessary to sustain life, which is what I think the state ought to be responsible for. But for capitalists, the primary usefulness of the state lies in its ability to protect property and nothing else. So by assigning blame to individuals and letting the state off the hook, you are playing into the hands of the 1% who say, yes, good, shrink the state so that I can continue to exploit people's labor and pay no taxes while everyone who works for me remains just sick enough to be too tired to organize against me, but with just enough access to modern medicine to remain alive, to continue to labor for me because they have to, because otherwise they will have no health insurance and no home. And oops, here we are, back where every single episode has ended lately, and that is class struggle. Hello. A person can be perfectly healthy and also technically obese based on their BMI. Whether or not a person is healthy does not and should not determine their worthiness.
Like, I don't like the adjectives make this too much. A person, like, I don't even know what it means to be healthy. Like, that's like everybody's health, like all health is going to exist along some spectrum. Like, can a person who has like an autoimmune disease or whatever, like, can they ever be considered healthy, or are they like perpetually fucked because they have some, it's just a weird binary. But to say that you can be obese and be perfectly healthy, well, I don't know if that's true. If we're going to use the adjective perfectly healthy,
for empathy and respect. You can be the epitome of health and die of a heart attack tomorrow. You can struggle to maintain your health through no fault of your own. There are so many huge industries that depend on keeping us unhealthy in order to make their money that the odds are frankly stacked against us. You actually can't tell a person's health by just looking at them. That's literally why we have doctors and scanners and blood tests and urine tests and DEXA scans and all the other shit we rely on, so that doctors can try to see what's actually happening in our bodies, because turns out it's really complex. And while we all fight each other over whether or not we're healthy enough to deserve empathy or food stamps, meanwhile, Elon Musk has made $10 million in the time it's taken you to watch this video. You may think it's not that deep, but it so fucking is, okay? So what do we do about this? I would challenge challenge you to decenter capitalism from your life as much as possible. That's kind of a major fix for a lot of the ills of society. Can you borrow the thing instead of buying it? Can you make do with what you already have? Do you actually need the thing to begin with? When it comes to your body and the impossible standards being set around what is and is not the perfect health that you're supposed to be, that is being capitalized on by various industries to try to sell you shit, whether it's protein powders or greens powders.
The sad thing is it sounds like she knows a lot of facts and she's read a lot of stuff, but I feel like it's like the Marxist, the leftist brain rot, like fucks all of her conclusions up.
At-home workout equipment or protein bars or special weight loss programs or weight loss drugs or an at-home infrared sauna from Costco. Like, we are inundated with shit all fucking day because it's our responsibility to make ourselves healthy. And if we don't, then we're bad people. So we're willing to impulse buy shit to try to make it happen. Speaking from experience, a lot of the fat phobia that has been ingrained in us, we use to self-police, to shame ourselves. And it doesn't work. If shame worked, every fat person would be skinny as hell, okay? Because the society provides enough shame to go around. And yet we have an incredibly unhealthy population. So a major step is also trying to contend with the preconceived notions you have about your own worth inside your own head. Food deserts, childhood trauma, stress, anxiety, expectations of productivity from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. None of this is conducive to being healthy. The food industry spends billions of dollars every year on food science that is literally specially formulated to fuck with your lizard brain so that you cannot stop eating even when you want to. The system is specially formulated to make you ill and then make you feel bad for being ill. And the standards of health that we are all being held to were largely made up and based off of centuries of misogyny, eugenics, and racism. That is so much to contend with. It's okay if your relationship with your health and
there are aspects of this that are true, but I feel like she's just over stressing a little bit, but I guess everybody does. It depends on what your video is on.
your body varies from day to day. It's okay if you can't overcome the entire system while you're actively being oppressed by it. Health looks different for different people. You are not a moral failure if you don't live up to the made up health standards, and you deserve to feel good about yourself no matter what you look like. You do not owe anyone your health. You also deserve to have the tools to have agency over your own health, and that is not easy to attain the way the world is currently set up, and that fucking sucks. But you also do have some agency.
This is true. This is one of the most difficult things that I feel like people have when it comes to their life is people can't accept that there might be something that's not like ideal about you or might even be bad about you or something that you could change that would be beneficial to you otherwise. But because you haven't, you're like a horrible person. So like people have to go two ways. Either one, they get down on themselves way too much. And people do this related to food and weight. Or two, they cope and they try to make it sound like that bad thing isn't actually a bad thing at all. It's just some other thing that's not really bad and people are exaggerating how bad it is. For some reason, like people can never just say like, oh, like here's the thing about me. I wish it were different, or, it could be different. It'd probably be better if it was, or I don't even care that much about it. I'm not going to do much to change it, but it's a bad thing or whatever. But like, I don't hate myself as a result of it. That's a really difficult thing, I think, for people to do, to have that position.
Yes and situation. We can acknowledge the societal hurdles and bullshit and also work towards feeling better in our bodies if we do not feel healthy. Whether or not you choose to do so does not make you morally superior or inferior. However, I personally have worked through my relationship with my body with a therapist and some EMDR sessions, which is a privilege not many people have access to, but if you do, I highly recommend unpacking the self-loathing, perfectionism, and self-policing that comes with especially being a woman in this fucking cesspool. And then I have found spite to be an incredibly motivating factor when it comes to my health. Like, I do it for me too, but learning about how the BMI scale was just invented by some dude and was never meant to be an individual indicator of anything, learning about how racism and sexism shapes how society places worth on individuals based on body type, learning about how white nationalism benefits from enforcing gender norms wherein women should be small but not so small because we have to be healthy because we must bear the Aryan children. All of that I find really inspiring to never have children and instead spend my life figuring out how to be able to deadlift a small vehicle. You know what I mean? I also have hypermobility and experience joint pain no matter what my weight is. So I'm on a mission to figure out how much muscle it takes to no longer experience joint pain, which may not be within my control, but also makes me acutely aware of the aging process and concerned with having mobility well into my old age. So I try to extend my self-empathy while also maintaining a sense of hope and agency over what I can control and my own wellness and over feeling good in my body while maintaining realistic expectations and not buying into the unrealistic standards for health or thinness. And that's a lot to juggle, and I often really struggle with all of that. But doing that work inside of yourself means that you will also be less likely to extend that judgment to other people who are likely dealing with things that are not apparent just by looking at them. And once again, we come back to empathy and community as an antidote to the fascist hellhole that is currently engulfed this stupid country. Become ungovernable by showing empathy to yourself and your neighbors, because that's radical. Also, feel free to drop in the comments all the reasons why you don't agree with me, because this subject really gets people riled up, and I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. And if you'd like to support my work, consider joining here on YouTube by clicking the big join button below, or supporting me over on Patreon, patreon.com/Legion Miller, where you get access to all these episodes completely ad-free. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons, Mark, Sarah Shelby, Art, David, Latranger, Lucas, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, you'll like the one from last week about why rich people are obsessed with Saudi Arabia. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
I'm gonna have mandatory women viewing content, okay? Until you guys are cured of your hatred. Jesus. Okay.